Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we are going to try to understand the economy. Where is it now and where is it headed to? Is the government telling us the truth about what is taking place and what already has taken place already in the economy? Are they telling us what is it now? Are they telling us where we're going? Well, tonight we are going to be speaking about all this with a man who is credited with Reaganomics, and actually he is known to be the father of Reaganomics. We had him on the show here a couple of times before. He is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. We will be going to him very soon. But first, ladies and gentlemen, you know, we are headed through, or actually we are facing a tsunami. And the question that we need to know, are we ready, or we need to ask, are we ready to face this tsunami? Are the people on top, are they competent enough? Do they know what they're doing? And do they know where they're taking us? Now, if you remember, those of you who remember President Carter, the economy was very bad at that time. And Reagan took office, and the economy got better. It took us a while, but it got better. And, you know, some people even criticized that. But before we go to our guest, who was the Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury under Ronald Reagan, former Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal, currently the Chairman of the Institute for Politics, Economy, and Research, and a fellow at the Independent Institute, which is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Before we go to him, let's go, and I want you're going to watch about a 2-minute clip. The first one is with Congressman Brad Sherman from California. We played that one before when it happened, actually back in September, when he was saying why they forced him. Actually, he did not say why they forced them to sign the bill, the bailout bill, the first one. And then the second clip, you're going to hear Congressman Paul Kondrowski from Pennsylvania telling us what took place at that time that apparently Brad Sherman did not know. So again, Brad Sherman, he's going to say they forced them to sign the bailout bill, and Paul Kondrowski, he's going to say why they told them to sign the bailout bill. That's the first one. We're not talking about the stimulus bill that President Barack Obama just signed. We're talking about the first bill when George Bush was in power. Let's go ahead and play the clip.
And sustaining a panic atmosphere. That atmosphere is not justified. Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no. That's what I call fear-mongering.
Paul Kondrowski is supporting Wall Street but not Main Street with this latest $825 billion package now moving through the House.
They are right to this extent. Why did we do that? We did that because the Secretary... Look, I was there when the Secretary and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve came those days and talked with members of Congress about what was going on. It was about September 15th. Here's the facts, and we don't even talk about these things. On Thursday at about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Federal Reserve noticed a tremendous drawdown of money market accounts in the United States to the tune of $550 billion. Was being drawn out in a matter of an hour or two. The Treasury opened up its window to help. They pumped $105 billion in the system and quickly realized that they could not stem the tide. We were having an electronic run on the banks. They decided to close the operation, close down the money accounts, and announce a guarantee of $250,000 per account so there wouldn't be further panic out there. And that's what actually happened. If they had not done that, Their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours the world economy would have collapsed. Now, we talked at that time about what would happen if that happened. It would have been the end of our economic system and our political system as we know it. And that's why, when they made the point, we've got to act and do things quickly, we did. Now, Secretary Paulson said, let's buy out these subprime mortgages. That's what he came to Congress, but he said, give us latitude and large authority to do many things as we decide.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, with us tonight is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury under Reagan, and former Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal. Dr. Roberts, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Dr. Roberts, you heard, we're going to cover a lot of issues tonight, but you heard two congressmen, one saying that they were forced to sign the bill back in September, and the other one just a few days ago told us why did they have to do that? Because the sky was falling, and $550 billion within an hour or two is a lot of money. What is going on, Dr. Roberts?
Well, I agree with the two congressmen that fear was used to deceive them into passing the handout of enormous sums of taxpayers' money to the banks who had caused the problem. The information that the congressman was given was false. It's not possible for $550 billion to clear in 1 hour. And it certainly would not be possible for $5.5 trillion to clear in 1 day. So they were given false information in order to, like the weapons of mass destruction, like Al-Qaeda connections, like Iranian nukes. It was just part of the fear-mongering that is the stock in trade today of the government in Washington, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat. You also would have to think, well, where can the money go? If you draw down all the money funds in the United States, where does the money go? An electronic transfer does not deliver cash to your house that you can hide in your mattress. So where would the money go? Is it going to go into the banking system, which also has the same problems? The banks are the ones that are being bailed out, not the money market funds. So there's no place for such huge sums of money to go in a few hours. So the whole thing was fear-mongering, and the banksters who caused the problem are the same people who are in charge of the government, who are in charge of solving the problem, and what they did was to take advantage of the situation in order to steal money from the taxpayers and put it in their pockets. And that's all that has happened, and that is why the so-called bailout has done nothing to stop the continuing slide in the stock market or to stop the continuing explosion in defaulting mortgages or to stop the continuing explosion in the rate of unemployment, because the bailout does not deal with the problem.
Now, Dr. Roberts, when you were the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan had a $780 billion bailout back in the 80s, and...
No, of what?
Well, what happened, I guess that's where Silicon Valley came from all that bailout, didn't it?
No. savings and loan associations were trapped by disintermediation. They borrowed short and lent long, and the monetary policy of Paul Volcker drove up short-term interest rates so that they were higher than the long-term rates, so that they were paying, the S&Ls were paying depositors far more for the money than they could collect in mortgage interest. So they got into serious difficulty, but the existing institutions set up to protect depositors it came into play. So there was no $700 and something billion bailout. That would have been an enormous sum in those days.
Was there any similarities between the economy now and the economy when you guys took over?
No, none whatsoever. For example, there was no derivatives. Derivatives had not been invented. They did not exist. The dollar was strong. Some people said that we had it too strong. We did not have a current account deficit. Today we have like $700–800 billion annual deficit. There were no jobs offshoring. The jobs offshoring didn't start until around 1990, when world socialism collapsed and the corporations found they had access to large supplies of labor in India and China. So there was nothing comparable in the Reagan years to what has happened today. The banking system was still heavily regulated. The Glass-Steagall Act was in place. The uptick rule was in place. Speculation was and short selling was regulated. Investment banks and insurance companies had to have reserves against their liabilities. All of that began disappearing in the Clinton administration, and of course in the George Bush administration. But not any of that happened during the Reagan administration. The financial system remained regulated as it had been following the Great Depression in the 1930s, and all the main acts of regulation were in place and enforced.
Okay. Now, what do you think of the recovery plan that President Barack Obama just signed last week? Or actually this week?
It does not address the problem. The problem, in fact, there are two problems that are much more serious than the problem of the banks. And neither problem is even discussed, much less is there any policy proposed to deal with it. Let me tell you what the two problems are. One is that because of all the jobs offshoring, the movement of American jobs abroad, or the filling of the ones that remain with foreigners on H-1B work visas, the effect has been to prevent any growth in the real income of Americans, except, of course, for the super rich. So what used to be in the United States, and was certainly true in the Reagan years, a rise in the real earnings of American workers over the years, that stopped. And so the only way they could continue to expand consumer demand in order to keep some economic growth in the economy was to send the consumer deeper and deeper into debt. And so what happened in the 21st century, in this first decade of the 21st century, what happened is that consumers substituted debt for what used to be an increase in their income. So they maxed out their credit cards, they refinanced their homes and spent the equity, and they continued this until they were so indebted they couldn't possibly take on another dollar of debt. And that is the problem. It doesn't matter whether the banks lend or not, because the consumers can't afford to borrow. They're so heavily in debt now. Their assets have declined in value. Their homes, for example, have dropped in value. Their pensions have been cut roughly in half by the shyster banksters and their fraudulent financial instruments. And so the American consumer, which has been the backbone of the economy, is simply out of action. And they can't get back in action because they're so heavily indebted. And nothing in the Obama plan or the Bush plan deals with that problem.
So
now, let me give you the second big problem. I'm talking a lot, I know, but
okay.
These are important issues. The second big problem is that of the United States dollar. The dollar is the world reserve currency, which is a great advantage to Americans because it means that the United States can pay its bills, its import bills, its import of oil and energy, of clothes, of shoes, of manufactured products, of advanced technology products. We are an extremely import-dependent country. We're able to pay for that in our own currency. We just hand them paper dollars. This is an enormous benefit. It lets us run these huge trade deficits that no other country can run. Well, the dollar has come under increasing pressure because of the continual, year after year, large deficits, trade deficits. And now, to finance the Bush bailout and the Obama stimulus plan, if you add those two figures together, it comes to $1.6 trillion. This amount of financing, this is near-term financing. It'll probably have to be done this year and next year. And it comes on top of the enormous deficit caused by the collapse of the economy. When the economy collapses, as it's doing, all the tax revenues to the federal government, to the states, to the cities, all these revenues shrink. So they then add to the deficit. So the United States is now facing, this year, probably a deficit 5 times larger than last year. The United States has never in its history had to finance such a huge deficit. And it's having to do so at a time when the rest of the world is in economic turmoil and doesn't have the money to come over here and buy our treasury bonds, when the American people don't have any money to buy them. And the whole question of how they finance the deficit is not addressed. No one has said, how are we going to sell all these treasury bonds to finance all this bailout and stimulus? And if they can't sell the bonds, then they have to print the money. And if they print the money, it will be the end of the dollar as reserve currency, because the rest of the world is sitting there holding huge sums of treasury bonds and dollar assets. And as they see the United States government behaving like a banana republic, printing money to pay its bills, they're going to say, oh my goodness, what are we doing with all of these dollar assets? We don't want them. I'm getting out before they become worthless.
Now, Dr. Roberts,
isn't
that what we have been doing for years, though, just printing money? How do we get money?
No, we have not. We have most certainly have not.
Okay, tell me, how do we get money?
we sell bonds. And basically, in recent years, our trading partners who have surpluses with the United States, for example, the main ones, the biggest ones are China, Japan, Saudi Arabia. They have large trade surpluses with the United States, so that means they get more dollars from us than they have to pay us for what they buy. And so the surpluses from their trade they use to finance the United States budget deficit. They come over here and buy the Treasury bonds. They buy Fannie Mae bonds, Freddie Mac bonds, the mortgage bonds. They buy companies. They buy, or they take 99-year leases on the state toll roads. They buy IBM's personal computers. They buy the iron ore fields in Minnesota. But they also buy the debt paper, the Treasury bonds of the United States government, and that's what finances the budget deficit, because the American saving rate for the last 10 or so years has been zero, because everybody, in fact, even negative at times, because the consumers, in order to continue to increase their consumption, to continue to drive the economy, go deeper and deeper into debt. So there's no savings domestically to buy the bonds, so they're bought by our trading partners. So that's the way.
So do we have a buyer for this recovery plan that Obama is talking about?
Well, that's what I've just said. They haven't addressed that problem. Last year, the Bush deficit, the last fiscal year, was $450 billion. And so the combined trade surplus of China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia is sufficient to buy that up and finance that deficit. But this year, it might be $2 trillion, which is 5 times bigger. And the trade surpluses of China and Japan and Saudi Arabia are not going to grow 5 times. They might could finance $400 billion, but they cannot finance 2,000 billion. And so, no, they don't have a buyer, and that's why I say if they don't find buyers, the Federal Reserve will have to buy the bonds and thereby create money for the Treasury by creating demand deposits for them. And so that then becomes what is called debt monetization, which is the behavior of banana republics. The government prints money to pay its bills because it spends more than it can raise in taxes and borrow. And once the United States does that, if it does it will be the end of the dollar as the reserve currency. And then we can no longer pay for our imports. And then you will see all kinds of serious problems. And none of this is thought about or addressed by Bush or by Obama or by the Secretary of the Treasury of either government or by the economic profession, the National Economic Council, the media. This is totally ignored.
Okay, Dr. Robert, if you are asked, if you were the Secretary of the Treasury, what would you advise the President to do?
I would tell him that the first thing we have to do is to protect the dollar's role as reserve currency. Because if we lose that status, we can't pay for our imports. And if we're heavily import dependent, it would be just chaos. So the first thing we do is we have to protect the dollar's reserve currency status. So this means...
Now let me ask you about that. Do you think, is it too late to protect that designation, or can we still do it? How would we do that, though?
Yeah, I think it's getting very late. But we have one chance left, and what we would have to do is we would have to announce to the world, first of all, that we're aware of this problem and that we are going to protect it. And here's what we're going to do. We're stopping the wars because we can't afford them. We don't have a couple $100 billion to waste in pointless wars. We are going to slash the defense budget. We don't need a defense budget that's as large as the rest of the world put together. We're going to close the hundreds of overseas bases that we can't afford to still be occupying Germany and Korea.
So basically, forget about the empire.
We have to forget about the empire. We can't afford it. It's like, you know, the Romans realized at one point that they couldn't afford all the empire they had, and they drew back the lines. They left Britain. They pulled the legions out of England. They reduced their frontiers. We're just going to have to give them up altogether. We could save $500 billion a year just by stopping the wars and cutting the defense budget, and we would still have a defense budget larger, much larger than any other country. So that's one thing they would have to do. And the other thing they would have to do is bring back all the offshore jobs. It's impossible to have an economy when your own industry takes the best jobs and locates them offshore and employs a foreign workforce instead of an American workforce. No economy can survive that. So they would have to bring those jobs back. They would do that by changing the way they tax. They would abolish the corporate income tax and tax corporations based on where they produce.
Dr. Roberts, you don't think people in Washington who are handling this stuff, why they don't understand all this? I mean, this is basic. This is economic 101.
It's very easy to understand why they don't understand it. The first reason is they're full of hubris, and they think they're a superpower and a unipower, and they're used to having their way. They're used to prevailing, and they're used to the world doing whatever they want. That's one reason. The other reason is the government in Washington is essentially a government of a few special interests. Washington is ruled by the financial community, the Israel lobby, and the military security complex, and nobody else has a voice. And so what they're doing suits those three powerful interest groups. The bankers are happy. They're being delivered up hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions perhaps, of taxpayer money or of debt obligations that taxpayers in the future will have to make good on. So they're very happy. We're shoveling money into their pockets. Why are they complaining? The military security complex is happy because they're getting fantastic contracts for armaments and wars, and they're rolling in money. And, of course, the Israel lobby is happy because they are reducing the part of the Arab world, the Muslim world, that's capable of giving any support, its only moral support, to the Palestinians. So as long as those three interest groups are successful in imposing their agenda on the American people, there's no reason for the government to change.
Okay. Now, let me take you back to September 18th, which is very much the day that Brad Sherman was talking about, and also Paul Konjarsky was talking about. The run on the banks. Now, you're saying somebody lied. Do you think, was it Colson, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, or was it the congressman that was lying about the run on the banks on the 18th of September?
No, I think that the congressman was telling the truth, that that's what he was told.
So, which means that Paulson, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Secretary of the Treasury at that time gave him lies. Now, if they did, I mean, the market, it does say, because on September 17th, Lehman Brothers lost about $40 billion just in that 1 week.
But why would you be surprised that the Congress was told lies? They were told lies about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. We're in this. We got into a war that lasted 6 years, and that, according to the Nobel economist Joseph Stiglitz, cost us $3 trillion, which we don't have because of lies. We're now being told, despite the national intelligence estimate to the contrary. Just the other day, President Obama said that Iran was working on nuclear weapons. There's no evidence of that.
Now, let me ask you.
We're told lies all the time. Why are you surprised the government tells lies? I mean.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick question. As an economist, and you've been involved with that, and you were in the middle of it, who would? Let's assume it happened. Let's assume 55 or 550 billion dollars in 2 hours they were wiped out. Let's assume it did happen. Who would do that? Who has the capacity to actually do that? Or the capability?
Look, it's possible that many people put in orders to withdraw their funds, but it's not possible for the system to clear that many in an hour or two. It just couldn't happen. And furthermore, the whole question is, where were they moving the money to?
Could it be going outside the country?
What for? Those banks,
I don't know, maybe an attack on our financial system?
We all know by now. We know it's a fact. It's in the paper every day that every bank in the world is in trouble. They're talking about even Switzerland failing.
Could it have been an attack on our financial
system?
system?
So where's the money going to go? Where is this $550 billion go in an hour? Much less $5.5 trillion. We're talking now about, what, 6 times as much? 7 times as much in one day? And where is it going?
Can our system be attacked to that extent? Our financial system, our money market, can it be attacked in one day by somebody who doesn't like us?
No. It's very hard to move money because of all the anti-money laundering laws, all the terrorist laws. You know, even to try to move money from one deposit that you have to another, you run into, well, who are you? Show us your driver's, send us a copy of your driver's license, blah, blah. I think it's entirely possible and probably true that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury saw that holders of money market funds were nervous. And I'm sure they were, because they had heard about Lehman paper, and Lehman paper was in some money market funds. And so I'm sure that it was correct to the extent that there was nervousness and that there was some danger people would desert money market funds, and that the Treasury and the Federal Reserve decided to preempt that by giving guarantee of $250 to every $250,000 to every money market account, you know, like the guaranteed bank deposit. So I can see that they would do that, and it was a sensible thing to do. But that's totally different from me. They didn't need the bailout bill to pass in order to issue a guarantee of the deposit.
Okay.
And so what they did was they used the prospect of people taking money out, something they could block simply the way they did it by issuing a guarantee of the deposit. But they used that to create a fear in the congressmen to get them to pass something else. the bailout bill. Well, the bailout bill didn't create the guarantee of the money market fund. They simply announced it. They didn't need the bailout bill to make that announcement.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
in that sense, you see, they used the fear to get a huge sum of money with no accountability, no transparency. And we still don't know exactly what they've done with it, or why they gave it to those banks, or why they gave more to some than to others.
Okay.
And the Federal Reserve still hasn't been willing to say who it gave all these loans to. So they used fear to get freedom of action, the way Bush used it in Iraq.
Okay. Dr. Roberts, we have many people lined up to speak with you on the phone, so we're going to go to the phones with Rachel on line 1. Rachel.
Yes, hello. It's really good to talk to you.
Thank you.
You too, Hesham. But I read a lot about what Craig Roberts says. First of all, we got to end the Fed. That's number one. And this stimulus package is a really bad package. And we got to end CAFTA and NAFTA and all these trade agreements. And Obama went today on his first foreign trip to Canada to talk about the North American Highway.
Okay.
Huh?
Dr. Roberts, do we need to end the Federal Reserve Bank?
Well, you can't right now, because the way everything is set up, they have to have that to provide the liquidity and the backup to the banks. So you can think about doing that when there is a stable situation, but not when there's an unstable one. If you did that now, there'd just be a big hole in the institutions that they
Now, let
have
me
to
ask you
rely on.
something. How federal is the Federal Reserve Bank?
Well, I know, I've heard all of the stories, and
Tell us the right story. We want to hear the right story.
well, the Federal Reserve chairman and every member of the board is appointed by the president. They're not appointed by some conspiracy of private bankers. And so they're appointed by the president. And they are also constrained in part, not totally, but in part by the Treasury. And they can only take so much criticism from Congress or the President or the Treasury. So they don't have freedom of action, and they have very specific duties that they're supposed to perform. They often fail them. But what they're supposed to do is known. And so it is, in that sense, a federal organization. It's not something run by some...
Okay. Rachel, we're going to have to move on to other callers. Thanks for your call.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Roberts, we're going to go back to the phones with James from California. James?
Thanks for taking my call, Hesham, and I
You're welcome.
appreciate being on with Paul again. He's on my email list, and I receive his articles on a regular basis, and we're in touch via email as well. Let's cut to the issue, cut to the chase here. We're talking about a war for Israel in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. That basically happened because of 9/11. 9/11 happened because of our support for Israel. Also, the war for Israel in Iraq. Then we have what's going on, in Afghanistan, with probably spreading through Pakistan. How much is this going to cost us? I've got several points to make. The majority of these people...
Very quick, James.
What's that?
Do it very quickly.
I will. The majority of what we're dealing with here are Jewish bankers and Wall Streeters that have basically heisted the system. The Federal Reserve, you've got Geithner, who was part of this mess to begin with the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Where's all this money gone? I just saw the documentary on CNBC recently. It was titled House of Cards. It talks about how Greenspan, when he was the head of the Federal Reserve, was printing out, well, he basically lowered the interest rate to result in the mortgage crisis because the 9/11 hijackers had basically accomplished what they wanted to do to us tragically, ruining our economy. So Greenspan basically opened the spigot for this mortgage crisis by making the money easily available. You have a majority of these people being Jewish, Wall Street bankers, and all. You know, I'm not saying every one of them are Jewish, but if you take the majority and you do a survey, they are Jewish, and they're basically taking us for a huge ride. They're indebting us, and if they get us into a war with Iran, as Paul Craig Roberts said, that'll be the end of it. How much longer are we going to sit here and take this, like the Weimar Republic and what the Jews were doing then? Are we going to sit here and just take this until America goes into the tank for it? Again, please take a look at also take a look at Gerald Salente's article for Russia Today back on February 11th, and he's saying we're going to have food riots here and a tax revolt by the end of the year. How credible is that, Paul? I wanted to ask you that as well. And I'll leave you with neoconzionistthreat.com for more about this War for Israel agenda, and we've got to take our government back from the Jews. I'm being frank now. I'm not saying it's all Jews, but we have to take a stand.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Thank you. Dr. Roberts, you have any comments?
Well, that's a plate full.
James always does that.
Yeah. I do think that there is danger that there would be some food shortages if the dollar loses its reserve currency role and we can't pay for our imports. That would mean there would be disruptions in energy supplies, and therefore there would be transportation disruptions. And so grocery stores may not get their deliveries on time or as regular as we are accustomed to having. It may also affect the mobility of Americans, because if you can't pay your massive import bill in your own currency, you've got to have some other way to pay it, and right now we don't. And so those types of disruptions could occur, and it would certainly be scary to people and threatening, and I can't predict.
So what can people do besides praying?
Besides what?
Praying to God to save us? Now, let me ask you this. James mentioned that 9/11 destroyed the economy in the United States. How true that statement is?
No, it did not. It didn't do anything. It destroyed 3 buildings in New York. But it didn't really hurt the economy.
But we were doing pretty good.
I don't believe that Greenspan had such an easy monetary policy because of 9/11. I think he had the easy monetary policy to cover up the impact on the economy of all the job loss from the offshoring. You know, when you have so many American corporations moving the work offshore, that hurts the economy. And so I think they created a real estate boom to mask that or to compensate for it, because they didn't want the economy to go down. They were already at war, and they wanted, to make something substitute for the loss of jobs from the corporations moving so much work offshore. So they created this real estate boom, which made people feel rich because the house price was going up, so they would go deeper in debt to keep spending. So I think that's what it was. I don't think it had anything to do with 9/11. 9/11 might have been an excuse. They certainly didn't want to stand up and say, oh, we're doing this to cover up the job loss from offshoring, because that'd make all the big corporations mad. So they weren't going to say that.
Okay.
I don't think that we can easily stop the wars, because we have this sense that we have to prevail. We have this, the neoconservatives are very well entrenched. They're just as entrenched in the Obama administration as they were in the Bush administration. They're entrenched in the media. And they have this agenda, it's an ideology really, that the United States has to be the hegemonic power in the world, that we have to be in a position that we dictate what everyone does. This is why we're trying to put military bases in former constituent parts of the Soviet Union so that we can negate their strategic deterrent so that we can boss them around. So we're mainly concerned with trying to boss people and make them do what we think they should do rather than what they want to do. And that makes it hard to stop wars that we've started for that.
Dr. Roberts, we're going to go back to the phones. We're going to Philadelphia with Alexander. Let's see. Alexander?
Yes?
Yes, you're up.
Oh, yeah. Hello. My name is Alexander from Philadelphia. I'm a great fan of your show. I want to say that anything, the stimulus plan that they do, that's okay, but that's just like putting a Band-Aid on a big gaping wound. The biggest problem is the waste of the money for the war in Iraq. And, overseas, the big empire, no money is coming in and a lot of money going out. The bankruptcy is the bankruptcy in the U.S. debt. If you don't solve that problem, this is just a Band-Aid.
Very good. Thanks, Alexander. I think that's what Dr. Roberts had mentioned earlier. Let's go back to the... You have any comments, Doctor? Because that's very much what you said.
Yes, that's what I said.
Yes. Okay, let's go to line 3 with Bernard on line 3. Bernard?
Yes, Dr. Roberts, can't you connect the dots and see what happened last year, for example, when the Bilderberg was in Canada, and they talked about oil going up to $150 a barrel. By June of 2008, oil was $147 a barrel, and we were paying $4.50 a gallon. Now, several months ago, the Bilderbergs met in Virginia, as you recall. And then in September, here we are with this big financial crisis, and we're bailing out AIG, we're bailing out Bear Stearns. I'm talking about big, trillions of dollars now. Can't you connect the dots and see that the Bilderbergs and the New World Order is the ones that have started this financial meltdown of this country?
It was. Thank you. Was this planned, Dr. Roberts, by the Bilderbergers?
No, I don't think so. I think it's always a mistake to attribute such massive power to private organizations, which really are a little more than discussion groups. You see, the reason the price of gasoline and oil went up so much was because the hedge funds had lost billions of dollars in the subprime derivatives, and they wanted to make money back, and so what they started doing was speculating in oil futures contracts. And so the hedge funds started flipping these oil futures contracts just the way the real estate people had flipped contracts on condos and houses and caused the real estate bubble. And so what they did, the hedge funds, you see, the oil is priced in the futures market. You can buy or sell a futures contract on oil, either to take delivery or to make a delivery. And so what they did, they speculated on those and drove them up real quick to get the money back they had lost in other ways. And during the period in which the price went up, the supply did not change. Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Canada or Mexico, nobody cut their output. The supply didn't change. The demand didn't change. All that changed was the price on the futures market. And that was due, in my view, to the speculation. And that should not have been permitted. The government should have stopped that
But
type
aren't they speculating now?
No, because you see, they didn't make the mistake that the people made in the real estate market. They did it and got out, so they didn't get trapped in it.
So are you saying that speculators are out of that business?
They're out of that
Completely?
Yes.
There's no, that business is not there anymore.
They could start it back tomorrow, but at the moment, that's not what they're doing. See, you can...
Who's they?
Excuse me. There's information available on what percentage of oil futures contracts are companies dealing with their, the flow they need to provide the gasoline to the stations on their contracts and so on, and speculative activity. And the amount of speculative activity, which was normally around 20%, it went up to like 40 or 60%. I think 60 if I remember correctly. And there was some huge increase during the period that we had the sharp rise in gasoline prices. And when it turned and went away, it wasn't because demand fell or supply increased. It was because the speculative activity in the futures market ceased.
Dr. Roberts, we only have a couple of minutes left. Tell me, what should we expect in the next couple of years? How bad is it going to be?
Well, I don't know that answer. What I told you at the beginning of the show, the two big problems that are not addressed, and
but you said the way
they addressed.
You said
Sorry?
the way we're going, we're doomed because we're going to lose the dollar. And if we do lose the dollar, we'll lose everything.
Yes, that's right, if we do.
Well, but that's the road we are on.
Yeah, we're on that road, but you know what tends to happen, and I'm not saying it's going to, but what tends to happen is when you have when you have policies that aren't working and they're failing, then the failure drives you to find better policies. So it's entirely possible that that what they're doing is not going to work, and that the failure of it will drive them to find out what would work, how they need to change. So there is that possibility that that when the stock market keeps going down and unemployment keeps going up and the banks are still in trouble, they may say, well, what are we doing wrong? And they may start listening to other people. Right now, they're only listening to the people who caused the problem. And so there is some possibility that the failure of their policies will drive them toward a better solution. I can't guarantee that, but that is a possibility. It often happens in history. In the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln couldn't find a general that could deal with the tiny little Confederate army, which was minuscule. And he had to work his way through all kinds of generals. He fired them, he finally found one. So Obama may have to end up working his way through all his economic advisors. He may have to fire them and fire them and fire them, and he might finally find one. And that is...
Does he have the knowledge, though, to actually do that?
Sorry?
Does Obama have the knowledge to know what he's doing and who's he looking for?
No, but he will be able to see whether something is working or not. And if things just get worse, then he will realize that the people he's got aren't the ones he needs.
The views and opinions expressed in the previous program are strictly those of the segment producer and do not reflect the views of Acadiana Open Channel, its staff, board of directors,